Alright, so I made a video the other week discussing how Game of Thrones messed up Sansa's character and how it led to some troubling complications. Now, and the video did quite well compared to most of my other recent ones, so I thought we'd discuss what went wrong for Tyrion too. To which, no, we're not just gonna say too much walking around with nothing to do, too much making bad decisions and being unintelligent, too many jokes about Varys being a eunuch. That's obvious, but I feel like that stuff is more the symptom of deeper problems rather than the problems themselves. So what are the actual problems, and which one do I think in particular is the roots of what went wrong for Tyrion's character most in the show? Be prepared for me to discuss all of that in a slightly haphazard manner, and yeah, first let's watch a train move across some water. So I suspect a lot of you might regard this as the single most damaging moment for Tyrion's character. I wouldn't necessarily agree, but it is an obvious contender to start with. Tysha. Basically, as a recap, in Season 1, Episode 9, Tyrion tells Shae and Bronn that when he was young, he and Jaime saved a girl named Tysha on the road from her attackers. After which she and Tyrion fell in love and married and lived in an inn for a fortnight until Lord Tywin found out about it, at which he had Jaime tell Tyrion that the girl never loved him at all, that Tysha was a whore Jaime had paid to pretend to be attacked and pretend to fall for Tyrion so that he would lose his virginity. Tywin then had Tyrion watch all of the guards SA Tysha before she was sent away, and he never saw her again. A horrible backstory to his character. One which is largely the same in the books, and one we don't really hear much more about until the night Tyrion kills his father in the book A Storm of Swords. Varys and Jaime help Tyrion escape his cell, and at the moment he has a last goodbye with his brother Jaime, the one and only person it feels like ever cared for Tyrion. Jaime reveals with guilt that Tysha wasn't a whore, that their father had just forced him to say that nothing of it was arranged, she was actually exactly as she had seemed to Tyrion. A cruel twist that leaves Tyrion so hurt and enraged that he lies to Jaime and says that he actually did kill Joffrey. He insults him. He tells him everybody Cersei has been having sex with behind his back, and then he goes off to kill their father, precisely because of this reveal. Well, maybe not precisely, but that's most definitely the catalyst for Tyrion going, right, I don't care anymore, I'm going to climb a very long, painful, exhausting ladder all the way up to the Tower of the Hand, knowing I'm quite unlikely to get a chance because I just want revenge now. And it's a reveal that is completely missing in the show. After that original scene where we hear about Tysha, we never learn anything more about her. The catalyst instead for killing Tywin is just basically Shae. This isn't a mission that changes a lot for Tyrion beyond me just saying, oh, it's bad because that's a good moment in the books and I'm sad it's not here. And I think the reason it's a problem is largely because it serves to remove a lot of Tyrion's darkness. Following the events of King's Landing in the books, Tyrion heads off into the world lost and broken with no real purpose or care beyond a vague desire for revenge against his family, and this wishful hope of finding Tysha and somehow being able to pick up where they started off. Tyrion's chapters in many ways become an exploration of this rage and pain he feels to all things, including himself. Instead, without the Tysha reveal, Tyrion is still on good terms with Jaime, so he doesn't feel any anger there, and there's less clear of a reason to feel such rage towards the world. It becomes part of a big adjustment to remove a lot of Tyrion's desire for revenge, and anything that would detract from him being a good character. There is no tragic feeling of that one person who actually loved him being taken away because he continues to believe Tysha didn't love him. Instead, in the show they make it that Shae appears to somewhat love him. She's the one person who loves him, for which Tyrion comes to feel it's his fault that he pushed her into betrayal. His fault for killing her. He apologises as he does so. All of which could be good character stuff. It's just it leaves them with less exploration to be done in Season 5. This version of Tyrion isn't so much angry at the world as he is at himself, which I think would require a little more subtlety easy to explore if you don't want Tyrion to seem even slightly villainous, and I think that probably proved too daunting a task for the writers. Instead of a season to kind of explore the fact that, damn, Tyrion just killed his lover and his father and was sent into exile, what has this all done to him? Instead, his problems are kind of immediately given a solution. Right at the very beginning of the season, Varys convinces him to go to Daenerys. She can be his new purpose in life. She is the good ruler and you are a good advisor, Tyrion, so going to her will resolve everything for you. Except it doesn't. Of course it doesn't, especially because it's slightly at odds with Tyrion's story so far. You know, Varys talks about how Tyrion is like the one good guy in a sea of monsters, that he can fight to make the world a very different place to all of the schemers in King's Landing. He can make it better, except at this point, Tyrion does feel like a monster. He feels like the problem. He murders the one person who loved him, so there's a slight disconnect there. Not impossible to fix, but challenging, for which David and Dan seem to just fall back on getting Tyrion to Daenerys as quickly as possible in the hopes that resolves his internal conflicts. So look, this point has become a bit messy because it's not all just about the Tysha reveal. However, what I think I'm trying to say is that in removing that much larger and personal emotional impact on Tyrion, this great example of how the world has fought against him in his eyes, it becomes much easier to relegate everything Tyrion went through at the end of season 4 down to just, well, he's lost everything and has no purpose anymore. Rather than, you know, greater feelings about his family, about his brother, about the danger and fear and pride of turning into Tywin writ small, about a class of people he feels has fought against him his entire life. Because it's less personal, it becomes easier to lose track of that in place of basically Tyrion feels lost with nothing to believe in now. We can solve that by having him believe in Daenerys, rather than anything actually personal to do with his character there. And I think what that means is when he meets Daenerys, there's not much meaning to explore because there aren't any greater character reasons personal to Tyrion for why he would team up with her. Meaning their relationship to each other is always going to be a bit shallow. There could have been a satisfying story, similar to where the books might be heading, in which Tyrion's rage has him lean into his worst impulses that he then pushes onto Dany, goads her into more bitter and ruthless behaviour, more Tywin-like politics, more of his desire for revenge that might then contribute to Dany's gradual descent into a villain arc that the show just randomly had to fall into out of nowhere. But you can't really do that when there's less reason for him to feel rage and much less exploration of revenge against King's Landing and his family in general. Like, not that it had to be a villain arc, but some of that darkness should definitely be something Tyrion at least struggles to overcome. The reason I haven't put this as the most egregious problem with his character is because I think it's not all a direct result of that Tysha omission. I think you could still do a lot of this without the Tysha reveal being there, still explore Tyrion's pain, just there's a lot less impact and obvious need to do so, which I think is part of why they lost track of it. But if I don't think this is the biggest problem, what else is wrong? Well, for starters, it's the fact I haven't told you all about this.
I have 7 kingdoms to look after, and 3 of them are in open rebellion. So, tell me what you want.
I want what is mine by right. Jaime is your eldest son, heir to your lands and titles, but he is a king's guard, forbidden from marriage or inheritance. I am your son and lawful heir.
You want
WorldAnvil.
It is mine by right.
WorldAnvil is a really cool thing, and they're still sponsoring me till death do us part. Listen to me passionately talk about them. WorldAnvil is an online tool for world building, the anviling of worlds, character creation, campaign building, story planning, and even writing, and a load more stuff that can be great for anyone with creative projects or games. I use it for the planning of my novel. My organisation is chaotic, so WorldAnvil really helps. I love the way you can create timelines of events with hyperlinks from those pages to a character bio or some other event or information or whatever. Like, my memory isn't the best for the minor details of stuff I invent, so when I'm reading back information about the history of my novel's world and I think, who is this person? I can only half remember. Or what order did these events happen in? Why did that become a social custom? Whatever. I can very easily click a hyperlink to a different page I wrote and check. The ability to create entire timelines based on your own invented calendars and be able to link everything to it, including changes in the maps for if a city gets destroyed or something something like that. That is so damn cool. And there are other tools too. Not all of them are ones I need for my novel personally, but they all still look really handy, and I've always found everything pretty easy to use. If it's your thing, they also have a Discord, and they run all sorts of events and community support and stuff, like this summer camp they've been running. It's all really great, and I enjoy getting to promote them. So there is a link in the description, and there's a pinned comment that entitles you to
51% off. Yep, it's 51 now.
All their subscriptions with the code TREE. If you want to try it out first, they have a free version so you can get familiar, you know, take your time, take it out for a nice dinner and see where things lead. Yeah, WorldAnvil. Here's something to say. Tyrion doesn't have to be on a villain-ish arc like he is in the books. They can absolutely whitewash him into someone good and noble, and it still be a good story if told well. I don't necessarily mind adaptation, but again, we actually need something to explore in the character. This problem is technically another omission. That's of the character Penny from the books, a dwarf girl whose brother was mistakenly killed when Cersei placed a bounty on Tyrion's head. In the book, she runs into Tyrion, at first wanting to kill him in revenge for her brother's death, only coming to quite like him, and I suppose you could say challenging his worst impulses. On the one hand, Penny represents an example of forgiveness there, sort of, but also challenging Tyrion's pride, for example. She teaches him not to just run his mouth off with witty insults anymore. He is no longer a Lannister. He will only get himself hurt or killed if he continues to behave like that. Equally, she compels him to see being laughed at not as the absolute worst of humiliations, but as maybe a good thing. Making others laugh can be wonderful. And sure, we don't quite know where this leaves Tyrion's arc in the books yet, partly because we haven't seen the Battle of Fire, but either she helps Tyrion to move away from his descent into villainy, or she is an example to show that Tyrion didn't have to end up on a villain arc, that there were other possibilities. What am I getting at? If the show wanted Tyrion to be good throughout, that's fine. They could use Penny to emphasise that. After killing his father and Shay, Tyrion is left at a particularly low point that could see him turning bitter, except Penny helps him to find himself again. That may not have been as good as the book arc, but it's perfectly acceptable, certainly not damaging to the character. But again, they either struggled to or didn't want to explore any of this here, for which most of what happens to Tyrion on the road to Meereen is incredibly half-hearted. What is the point of sending Tyrion into exile if you're not going to take everything away from him? If the man of witty insults, now without his status and his gold, will only get himself hurt or possibly killed if he continues to run his mouth off, that does become a danger in the books. And then equally, he finds himself thrown into slavery, the complete opposite of Tyrion's upbringing, and it becomes a good way to explore slavery, especially when that's a big theme in Dany's story, and also a good means to explore Tyrion. Take away everything he's used to as a means for him to develop as a character. But in the show, Tyrion and Varys travel comfortably enough in a carriage. Then Jorah does take him, but it's Jorah. We don't feel any danger there. He's a good guy that Tyrion slowly seems to begrudgingly win round, and then finally they're captured in the show. Finally a bit of danger and something to challenge him, but we have one scene where Tyrion's wits get them sent to Slaver's Bay, then another scene where Tyrion is able to convince a merchant to buy both him and Jorah, and then they just go straight into the fighting pit to be immediately found by Daenerys, and that's it. Nothing else. Slavery just becomes a plot point to get Tyrion to Daenerys rather than a story in and of itself. So in many ways I think that's the big issue. They never truly take anything away from Tyrion, only do it half-heartedly. So not only is there no exploration of what killing Tywin or Shay was like for him, what the trial at King's Landing was like, but there's also zero explanation of any of the events that happen in Season 5, because again, Tyrion's growth was kind of set out already in Episode 1 of Season 5. Reach Daenerys, she will give you the purpose. You don't need to grow independently or explore anything else in the run-up to that. And again, what it means is we then go into Season 6, 7 and 8 with Tyrion having learned absolutely nothing. He's exactly as he was, and I think this is why he ends up with basically nothing to do. It stops all his development in its tracks, and he ends up in this weird state of limbo for the rest of the show. They tie all his development in Season 5 to Daenerys in this really odd and shallow way, and then that makes it really difficult to do anything afterwards, you know? I think once you've lost track of the natural progression of an arc, it becomes harder to write one in later, if that makes sense. Let me throw out some less vague, more concrete problems for a moment though, something more tangible. I think there is a fundamental lack of enemies and danger in Meereen. Don't get me wrong, there's the Sons of the Harpy who clearly seem to have a lot of power. They're able to kill Sir Barristan out of nowhere in an annoying way, but they're just one singular danger without a face. There's no real clear character behind it we get to interact with. Like, there are these other masters from Yunkai and stuff, but they aren't truly characters really, are they? And so there's nothing to bounce off. Equally, there's no mystery to who's controlling the Sons of the Harpy because we aren't given many possible suspects, so again, nothing to bounce off or interact with there. Is it this person? Should I trust them? How can I figure out if they're behind it or not? None of that stuff, you know? A lot of what made season 1 compelling was the kind of murder mystery elements of Ned Stark figuring out who did in Jon Arryn. In Meereen, there's no one really except his star for characters to interact with or to be suspicious of or anything, which makes it near impossible for Tyrion or any of them to do anything. Without a playing field to actually play with, it becomes impossible for any of them to have any real impact. Not just Tyrion, but Daario, Grey Worm, Missandei, Sir Barristan, obviously, who perhaps was partly killed off because they had too many people that they couldn't find anything to do with. Another problem I think is the show also became increasingly obsessed with characters being paired up. People loved all that witty banter stuff between Tyrion and Bronn in the first few seasons, or Tyrion and Varys in season 2, or Jaime and Brienne, or Arya and the Hound, or later Jaime and Bronn, which is its own troubling section of the story. People generally enjoy these bits though, so like Hollywood executives, when an original film does well, they became obsessed with replicating it, whilst completely losing what made it work in the first place. Jaime and Brienne, or Arya and the Hound, worked as well as they did because there was visceral conflict and character exploration happening between them, not because it made a good pairing to crack jokes. In that sense, Tyrion and Varys were a successful pairing in season 2 because there was that sense of mistrust and tension about each other's motivations. But all of that is lost in season 5 onwards because all intrigue and danger to Varys fades when he lays his motivations bare to Tyrion. He tells us all outright that he thinks Daenerys can save the kingdom, that that's what he wants, to put her on the throne, so now there's no conflict and nothing to explore between him and Tyrion. It's all just been set out already. Suddenly this scene of Tyrion and Varys talking is looking like the root for a lot of the problems we get. And like, I don't enjoy making Varys into a straightforward good guy. I find that odd, but even if I accepted that, and like, if I respected that they do need to reach a point where some conflicts can be overcome in place of genuine friendship, like, fine. Even so, friends can still challenge each other, or else do separate things without the need to be paired up all the time. That's why we end up with all of these pointless jokes about Varys being a eunuch, because there's nothing else to do between them. I could talk about Tyrion's less troubling, more overly happy relationship with Sansa in the show compared to the books, but I touched on that in my Sansa video already, and whilst it is damaging to Sansa's character, it isn't necessarily damaging to Tyrion. Where, like, adapting Sansa's arc into a Cersei 2.0 is thematically damaging to the point of her character, I'm not sure that's the same for Tyrion here. So I'll say this in general again. I don't necessarily think making Tyrion into much more of a good guy is a problem, provided they did it well. But let me mention Shae in regards to that. I think making Shae into someone who genuinely loves Tyrion and only speaks out against him at his trial, only betrays him because he tried to send her away, called her a whore, pretended he didn't care about her if it meant she would flee to safety, and I heard of that causing her to lash out effectively and betray him. I think the problem there is that it detracts from the whole character point of this trial in the first place, or one of the points, that Tyrion isn't as politically savvy as he previously thought. He is incredibly cunning and can act effectively, but he also alienates, insults, and turns pretty much everyone in King's Landing against him, for which no one is willing to speak out on his behalf at the trial, and all are happy to condemn him for a crime they probably don't believe he even committed. That point doesn't land half so well because it becomes much more about Shae and a story of love and betrayal rather than how his own impulses led to a big portion of his demise. And yeah, in terms of where his character could go next following this, that becomes a problem because now it's not an exploration of his failings at all really. Instead, people endlessly talk in the show about how brilliant a job he did as Hand of the King and how he's one of the smartest people in Westeros for some reason, when he was not meant to be. There's nothing to explore there in making him perfect and pretending he did an amazing job where nothing went wrong. And that is ultimately what ruins his character, right? Not so much the fact he becomes someone he's not, or becomes someone inconsistent, all of which is at least partly true, but the fact he becomes absent of anything to really explore. There becomes little purpose to him being on the screen. That's what ruins him, I think. Yeah. And yet I'm going to make one final point before we finish. Not necessarily the biggest problem, but quite possibly the root for a lot of this. So, I don't think David and Dan whitewashed Tyrion into someone good without any thought for what they were going to do instead. Like, yes, sure, they didn't want him to be a vengeful character who could come to goad Dany into all of her worst impulses. They didn't want to go that route. Fine. We have to assume there was some planned route instead, though, some vague idea of an arc. While stuck in their carriage, Varys tells Tyrion that he was quite good at ruling during his brief tenure as Hand, to which Tyrion responds,
She wanted me to leave King's Landing. She begged me. I wouldn't go.
Why?
Because I liked it. Power.
I think this is the heart of what they wanted to do with Tyrion. Turn him into someone who fears power as a corrupting influence. He feels his enjoyment of power turned him bad, led him down a path of killing the one woman who ever loved him. If you forget the Tysha story that the show comes to pretend didn't exist. Power is now too dangerous a thing for Tyrion precisely because he enjoyed it and felt good at it. That is what prevented him from getting to leave King's Landing and living happily ever after with Shae. And again, it is a sensible way to go with Tyrion after season 4. I don't think it would be the biggest thing he might feel, but yeah, the problem is how you resolve it. Tyrion is now afraid of power, basically, so Varys says help Daenerys achieve power instead. She can handle it without becoming corrupted. So then Tyrion helps Daenerys achieve power in as good and non-corrupting a way as possible, except it isn't as simple as that. Tyrion's now softer advice keeps failing, to the point Dany starts to forgo his opinions and becomes more ruthless instead, to which Varys says, actually, I think she is becoming corrupted, before he immediately burns up in Dragonfire, and then Tyrion goes, oh wait, Varys is right, we have to stop her. And that's basically it. Let's also remember one of the first conversations Tyrion ever has with Dany as well.
I know what my father was. What he did.
So, here we sit. Two terrible children of two terrible fathers.
If they wanted Tyrion's arc to be good, then this has to be the meat of it all, surely. Daenerys, a woman with power who doesn't want to turn out like her father Aerys, and Tyrion, a man with moderate power who doesn't want to turn out like his father Tywin. Tyrion, an older man who has learned to grow beyond the influence of his father to become his own person, and so is well suited to help Dany do the same in her situation. Okay, it doesn't line up perfectly because Dany never actually knew her dad, so it is a very different situation for her, but there's still an interesting dynamic in that. Even if I don't think it's an amazing thing, it would be consistent. It would at least be something to explore. Only they've already shot themselves in the foot here, because we've never seen Tyrion troubled with the danger of becoming like his father and then learning to grow beyond it. That was never something they properly emphasised. It could have been exactly what he was doing during his journey to Meereen. That could have been his arc there. It could have then been at the end of it what made meeting Dany become so interesting to him, but yeah, they skipped that. They didn't want to delve into his dark and the dangers and the Tywin-like side of him, and so there aren't any experiences that he can then use to mentor Dany. Sure, he can potentially tell her clever political things, but there's now nothing character-driven he can tell her. Yeah, in that sense, I think they're setting themselves up for a dynamic that they've already made impossible to properly execute. And so, rather than a conflict of Tyrion either succeeding or failing to lead Dany on a path away from villainy through mentoring that draws on their character, we instead just get a really really watered down version of that. All of it also hampered, by the way, from the writers not understanding Dany's character either. That would have to be a separate video, but they chain all of Tyrion's character and arc to her without actually setting anything up that could make their dynamic worthwhile. I think that's the problem, really. They had an idea, but they could never properly commit to it because there was no previous setup to make that idea possible. None of the groundwork was laid in season 5 or before, meaning that season 6, 7, 8, there's just nothing as a result. I think that's the root for most of what went wrong, which perhaps you can attribute to the insistence on making Tyrion the good guy, for which perhaps the omission of the Tysha reveal in place of a much more regretful Tyrion killing Shay out of self-defense, perhaps that was the catalyst for this half-hearted arc. So yeah, big twist, I fooled you all. The Tysha omission is the most damaging aspect after all. Haha! No. Well, kind of. The point is, this video is unavoidably a very messy one because it's hard to give a concrete answer about what went wrong, but I think it's mostly that in season 5. I've tried to loosely jumble a load of my thoughts together, take them or leave them, or write comments. What did I get wrong? Or forget to mention, or simplify too much? Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe for more videos like this or other things. I do lots of stuff here. Support me on Patreon if you like even more stuff, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Tree Chukaba, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Billy Lee Myers Jr., Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell and Michael Hart. Thank you.